There's a photograph from Germany, 1923, that haunts me. A woman stands in her kitchen, feeding paper money into her stove. Not kindling. Not newspaper. Actual currency. Stacks of Reichsmarks burning because they were worth less than the wood they could buy. Her life savings couldn't purchase a single log. So she burned her savings instead. This woman had done everything right. She had worked hard. She had saved diligently. She had trusted the institutions that were supposed to protect her. And in the span of 18 months, everything she had built was reduced to fuel for a fire. But here's what terrifies me about that photograph: she never saw it coming. None of them did. The German people in 1921 would have called you insane if you told them their currency would be worthless within 2 years. The economists said it couldn't happen. The government said it wouldn't happen. The banks said everything was under control. They were all wrong. What happened in Germany wasn't unique. It wasn't a freak accident of history. It was a pattern that had played out in Rome, that had played out in France, that has played out in dozens of countries since. A pattern with clear warning signs, predictable stages, and devastating consequences. And that pattern is emerging again. Right now. In the country that controls the world's reserve currency. I'm not going to ask you to believe me. I'm going to show you the evidence. I'm going to walk you through 3 of history's most devastating hyperinflations: Rome, France, and Germany, and I'm going to show you the identical warning signs that preceded each one. Then I'm going to show you those same warning signs appearing today. By the end of this video, you will understand something that most people never grasp until it's too late: hyperinflation doesn't announce itself. It builds silently, invisibly, behind a facade of normality, until suddenly, catastrophically, the facade collapses. The woman burning her savings never saw it coming. Will you? To understand hyperinflation, you must first understand what money actually is. Money is not wealth. This is the fundamental misconception that destroys people during hyperinflation. Money is a claim on wealth, a promise, a representation, a symbol. The paper in your pocket isn't valuable in itself. It's valuable because you believe you can exchange it for things that are valuable: food, shelter, clothing, energy. This belief is called monetary confidence. And monetary confidence, once lost, is almost impossible to restore. When you save money, you're not accumulating wealth. You're accumulating promises. Promises made by governments and banks that someday, when you want to exchange those promises for real goods, they'll be honored at something close to their current value. Hyperinflation is what happens when those promises are broken. When the gap between the paper promises and the real wealth backing them becomes too large to ignore. When confidence collapses and everyone realizes simultaneously that the money they're holding is just paper. The transition from confidence to collapse is never gradual. It's a phase transition, like water turning to steam. The temperature rises slowly, degree by degree, nothing seems to change, and then suddenly, explosively, everything changes at once. This is why hyperinflation surprises people. The warning signs are there for years, sometimes decades. But because the collapse hasn't happened yet, people assume it won't happen. They mistake stability for safety. They confuse the absence of crisis with the absence of danger. The woman burning her savings in 1923 had watched warning signs accumulate for years. She had seen prices rise. She had heard economists debate. She had noticed that things cost more than they used to. But she had also seen life continue normally. The money still worked. The shop still opened. The economy still functioned. Until it didn't. Let me show you how this pattern has played out across history, starting with the first great hyperinflation of the Western world. Rome, 3rd century AD. The Roman Empire had been debasing its currency for over 200 years. What started as a subtle reduction in silver content, from 4.5 grams to 3.8 grams under Nero, had become a systematic destruction of monetary value. By the year 268 AD, the denarius contained only 5% silver. The coin that had once been genuine precious metal was now essentially worthless bronze with a thin silver wash. But through legal tender laws and government enforcement, people were still forced to accept these coins at face value. The warning signs had been visible for generations. Prices had been rising steadily. Older coins had been hoarded while newer coins circulated. Merchants had begun demanding payment in goods rather than currency. The economy had developed a dual nature, an official economy using debased coins, and an unofficial economy using barter and old currency. But life continued. The empire still functioned. The military still marched. The government still governed. The crisis hadn't arrived yet, so most people assumed it wouldn't arrive at all. Then came the crisis of the 3rd century. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome had over 26 different emperors. Most were military commanders who seized power through violence and were killed the same way. Each one faced the same problem: they needed to pay armies to stay in power. Each one reached for the same solution: create more money. The debasement accelerated beyond anything Rome had seen before. Emperors weren't reducing silver content by percentages anymore, they were eliminating it entirely. The coins became pure base metal with no precious metal content at all. And then the phase transition occurred. Prices didn't rise gradually. They exploded. Records from this period show prices increasing by over 1,000% in some regions. The economy that had functioned, imperfectly but functionally, for centuries simply stopped working. Trade collapsed because no one knew what anything was worth. Farmers refused to bring food to cities because the money they received wouldn't buy anything by the time they tried to spend it. Urban populations starved. The complex supply chains that had fed and clothed the empire fractured into isolated local economies. The tax system collapsed because taxes collected in worthless currency couldn't pay for anything. The government began demanding payment in kind, grain, cloth, labor, because money no longer functioned. This crippled the administration and ended any hope of coordinated governance. The military fragmented because soldiers couldn't be paid reliably. Legions became loyal to whoever could feed them rather than to the distant emperor in Rome. The unified defense that had protected the empire for centuries dissolved into regional warbands. This is what hyperinflation does. It doesn't just destroy savings. It destroys the complex systems that hold civilization together. Money is the coordination mechanism that allows millions of people to cooperate. When money fails, cooperation fails. When cooperation fails, civilization fails. Rome never recovered. The Western Empire limped on for another 2 centuries, but the hyperinflation of the 3rd century had broken something fundamental. The economy never returned to its former complexity. The population never returned to its former levels. The cities never returned to their former glory. The empire that had seemed eternal proved to be built on a foundation of monetary confidence. When that confidence shattered, everything built upon it came crashing down. France, 1789 to 1796. The French Revolution began with high ideals and empty coffers. The new revolutionary government had inherited massive debts from the monarchy and had ambitious plans for transforming society. They needed money they didn't have. Their solution was the assignat, a paper currency backed by confiscated church lands. The idea was elegant: the land was real, tangible, valuable. As the land was sold, the corresponding assignats would be destroyed. The currency would remain backed by genuine assets. The first issue was 400 million livres. The National Assembly solemnly promised this would be the only issue. They pointed to the valuable land backing the currency. They assured the French people that there was no cause for concern. The promise lasted 18 months. By 1790, the government had issued 1.2 billion livres. By 1791, over 2 billion. The printing presses ran constantly. Each crisis, war, rebellion, shortage, was met with more assignats. The backing of land became a fiction as the currency issued far exceeded the land's value. The warning signs accumulated exactly as they had in Rome. Prices began rising. At first, the increases were modest, 10%, 20%. People grumbled but adapted. The government blamed speculators, hoarders, counter-revolutionaries. Anyone except themselves. The older currency, gold and silver coins from the monarchy, began to disappear. People hoarded real money and spent the paper as quickly as possible. Gresham's law asserted itself: bad money drives out good. A black market emerged for hard currency. Those who needed to make real transactions, international trade, large purchases, long-term contracts, conducted business in metal coins at prices far above official rates. But the revolution continued. The government continued. Daily life continued. The assignats still bought bread, still paid wages, still functioned as money. The crisis hadn't arrived yet. Then came the phase transition. In 1793, the government implemented the law of the maximum, price controls backed by the threat of execution. Anyone charging more than official prices for essential goods could be guillotined. Anyone hoarding goods could be guillotined. Anyone speculating in currency could be guillotined. For a brief period, the terror enforced the illusion of price stability. But beneath the surface, the economy was disintegrating. Producers stopped producing because they couldn't cover costs at mandated prices. Farmers hid their harvests rather than sell at losses. Merchants closed their shops. The supply of goods collapsed. When Robespierre fell and the terror ended, prices exploded. The assignat, which had already lost most of its value, went into free fall. By 1795, it took 600 assignats to buy what one had bought in 1790. By early 1796, it took 20,000 or more. The scenes from this period echo through history. People carried currency in wheelbarrows for simple purchases. Workers demanded payment twice daily because the money would lose value between morning and afternoon. Restaurants changed prices between courses. A meal that cost 100 assignats at appetizer might cost 200 by dessert. In February 1796, the government publicly destroyed the assignat printing plates. The currency was officially worthless. The entire experiment, from creation to destruction, had lasted 7 years. But the cost was paid for generations. The economic chaos contributed to political instability that would culminate in Napoleon's rise. The destruction of the middle class created social upheaval that France wouldn't fully recover from for decades. The memory of hyperinflation created a deep distrust of paper currency that persists in French culture to this day. 7 years. From sound idea to worthless paper. From confident promises to burning printing plates. From economic stability to civilizational crisis. And no one who bought those first assignats in 1789 imagined it could happen. Germany, 1914 to 1923. The German hyperinflation is the most studied, most documented, and most terrifying example in modern history. It shows with perfect clarity how a modern industrial economy can be destroyed by monetary collapse. In 1914, the German mark was one of the world's great currencies. It was backed by gold. It was stable. It was trusted throughout Europe. A prosperous German citizen could save marks with confidence that they would hold their value. Then came World War I. Like every government facing war, Germany needed money it didn't have. Like every government in this situation, it chose to print rather than tax. The gold standard was suspended. The printing presses accelerated. The money supply quadrupled during the war. By 1918, prices had roughly doubled. Significant inflation, but not catastrophic. Life continued. The economy adjusted. Most Germans noticed higher prices but didn't panic. The currency still worked. This is the period that matters most for understanding our current situation. Germany in 1918 had already done severe damage to its currency. The warning signs were visible: money supply expansion, rising prices, loss of gold backing. But because hyperinflation hadn't arrived yet, people assumed it wouldn't arrive. They had 5 more years of warning before the collapse. After the war, Germany faced reparations demands that were mathematically impossible to satisfy. The government had 3 choices: default and face military occupation, impose crushing taxation and face revolution, or print money and hope for the best. They printed. From 1919 to 1921, the money supply continued expanding. Prices continued rising. The mark continued falling against foreign currencies. But the increases, while serious, still seemed manageable. A dollar that had bought 4.2 marks before the war now bought around 90 marks. Bad, but not catastrophic. Life continued. The warning signs intensified. Germans began converting marks to tangible goods whenever possible. Real estate prices rose as people sought to own something physical. Gold and foreign currencies traded at premiums on black markets. The velocity of money increased as people spent their marks faster, knowing they would be worth less tomorrow. But the newspapers still published. The factories still operated. The trains still ran. The government still assured everyone that stability would return. Experts explained why Germany was different, why full hyperinflation couldn't happen in a modern industrial economy. Then came 1923. In January 1923, French and Belgian troops occupied the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland, after Germany fell behind on reparation payments. The German government responded with passive resistance, paying workers not to cooperate with the occupation. Where would the money come from? The printing press, of course. The phase transition occurred. In January 1923, $1 equaled approximately 17,000 marks. By July, it was 353,000 marks. By August, 4.6 million marks. By September, 98 million marks. By October, 25 billion marks. By November 15, 1923, $1 equaled 4.2 trillion marks. The numbers become meaningless at this scale, so let me make it concrete. A loaf of bread that cost 250 marks in January cost 200 billion marks in November. A single egg cost more than the entire money supply of Germany from a decade earlier. Workers were paid twice daily and ran to the shops during lunch breaks because their morning wages would be worthless by evening. People burned money for heat because it was cheaper than buying wood. Children played with bricks of currency. A restaurant bill left on the table while you ate could double before you finished. A man who sold his house in 1921 and saved the money couldn't buy a cup of coffee with it in 1923. But the truly devastating effect wasn't on those who had nothing, it was on those who had done everything right. The middle class was annihilated. Doctors, lawyers, professors, engineers, anyone who had saved for retirement, who had bought life insurance, who had trusted the system, lost everything. A pension that would have provided a comfortable retirement couldn't buy a newspaper. A life insurance policy that represented decades of payments was worth less than the paper it was printed on. The responsible, the prudent, the savers, they suffered most because they had the most to lose. The social fabric of Germany tore apart. Trust in institutions evaporated. Extremism flourished in the chaos, on both the left and the right. A failed artist named Adolf Hitler attempted a coup in Munich in November 1923, during the peak of the hyperinflation. He failed, but the conditions that would eventually bring him to power had been created. This is what hyperinflation does. It doesn't just destroy money. It destroys the social contract. It annihilates the middle class. It rewards speculators and punishes savers. It transfers wealth from the prudent to the ruthless. It creates the conditions for political catastrophe. And it always comes as a surprise to those who lived through the warning period and assumed the collapse would never arrive. Now let me show you the warning signs. The specific, identifiable markers that preceded each of these hyperinflations. And let me show you where each of those warning signs stands today. Warning sign 1, massive expansion of the money supply. In Rome, the money supply expanded through continuous debasement of coins. In France, it expanded through printing assignats. In Germany, it expanded through printing papier marks. In the United States, the M2 money supply, the broad measure of currency in circulation plus savings deposits, has grown from $4.6 trillion in 2000 to over $21 trillion today. It nearly doubled during 2020 and 2021 alone. In a 2-year period, the Federal Reserve created more dollars than had been created in the previous century combined. This warning sign is flashing red. Warning sign 2, declining purchasing power of the currency. In Rome, prices rose consistently for over 2 centuries before the final collapse. In France, prices rose steadily in the years before hyperinflation took hold. In Germany, prices doubled during the war and continued rising for 4 years before the explosion. In the United States, the dollar has lost 87% of its purchasing power since 1971. Official inflation has exceeded the Federal Reserve's target for years. Real inflation, the kind you experience at the grocery store and the gas pump, is significantly higher than official numbers suggest. This warning sign is flashing red. Warning sign 3, monetization of government debt. In Rome, debasement was used to fund military and government spending. In France, assignats were created specifically to cover government deficits. In Germany, the Reichsbank bought government bonds with newly printed marks, directly funding the government spending. In the United States, the Federal Reserve has purchased trillions of dollars of government bonds since 2008. This is called quantitative easing, but it is functionally identical to the debt monetization that preceded every hyperinflation in history. The government borrows money, the central bank creates money to buy the bonds, and the government spends the money into circulation. This warning sign is flashing red. Warning sign 4, loss of currency's international standing. In Rome, the denarius was rejected by trading partners who demanded older, purer coins or payment in goods. In France, the assignat was worthless outside France's borders from early in its existence. In Germany, the mark collapsed in international exchange before domestic prices fully reflected its worthlessness. The dollar's international position is eroding. Countries representing a majority of the world's population are actively working to reduce dollar dependence. Russia and China trade in their own currencies. Saudi Arabia discusses pricing oil in currencies other than dollars. BRICS nations are developing alternative payment systems. Central banks worldwide are accumulating gold and reducing dollar reserves. This warning sign is flashing yellow, trending toward red. Warning sign 5, flight from currency to real assets. In Rome, people hoarded old coins, demanded payment in goods, and converted currency to land and commodities whenever possible. In France, anyone with means acquired gold, silver, and real property. In Germany, the Flucht in die Sachwert, the flight into material values, saw everyone from peasants to industrialists converting marks into anything tangible. In the United States, we're seeing unprecedented interest in real estate, commodities, precious metals, and cryptocurrency. Home prices have soared beyond what incomes can justify. Gold prices have reached record highs. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have grown from nothing to a $1 trillion asset class. All of these represent the same phenomenon: people seeking to escape the currency. This warning sign is flashing red. Warning sign 6, government price controls and intervention. Diocletian's edict on maximum prices. The French law of the maximum. German price controls in the early 1920s. Every hyperinflation is preceded by government attempts to suppress the symptoms while ignoring the disease. In the United States, we hear increasing calls for price controls on healthcare, housing, food, and energy. Some have already been implemented at local levels. Each time inflation becomes politically uncomfortable, voices demand that the government do something about prices, as if legislation could create value. This warning sign is flashing yellow. Warning sign 7, loss of faith in monetary institutions. Every hyperinflation is preceded by a collapse of trust. People stop believing the currency will hold its value. They stop believing the government's assurances. They stop believing the experts who explain why everything is fine. In the United States, trust in the Federal Reserve has fallen to historic lows. Trust in banks has collapsed since 2008 and never recovered. Trust in government economic statistics is minimal. Most Americans believe actual inflation is far higher than reported. The faith that holds the system together is fracturing. This warning sign is flashing red. 7 warning signs. 6 flashing red. 1 trending that direction. This is not speculation. This is pattern recognition. These are the same warning signs that preceded every hyperinflation in recorded history, and they are all present in the United States today. Does this mean hyperinflation is certain? No. Nothing in economics is certain. Policy changes could be implemented. The decline could be managed. The situation could stabilize. But that's exactly what people said in Rome. In France. In Germany. Right up until the phase transition occurred. The woman burning her savings in 1923 had watched these warning signs for years. She had heard experts explain why collapse couldn't happen. She had seen the government promise stability. She had watched the currency continue to function despite the growing problems. And then one day it didn't function anymore. And everything she had was gone. The difference between those destroyed by hyperinflation and those who survive, even prosper, is preparation. It's recognizing the warning signs while there's still time to act. It's converting paper promises into real value before the promises are broken. Those who prepared in Rome acquired land, tools, and skills that had value regardless of what happened to the denarius. When the currency collapsed, they still owned productive assets. Those who prepared in France converted assignats to gold, silver, and property while conversion was still possible. When the printing plates were destroyed, they still held real wealth. Those who prepared in Germany bought foreign currencies, precious metals, and real estate in the early stages. When the mark became worthless, they had preserved their purchasing power. In every case, preparation required action before the crisis. Once the phase transition occurs, it's too late. The currency collapses faster than anyone can react. The people who wait until hyperinflation is obvious are the people who lose everything. The warning signs are visible now. Not in the future. Now. The same signs that preceded Rome, France, and Germany are flashing in the present day. What happens next depends on choices that haven't been made yet, by governments, by central banks, by billions of individuals. Hyperinflation isn't inevitable. But the conditions that make it possible are present. The question isn't whether the risk is real. The question is what you're going to do about it. I've studied these historical collapses for years because I believe they contain the most important lessons anyone can learn about money. The patterns are clear. The warning signs are identifiable. The consequences are predictable. But this knowledge is only valuable if it leads to action. If this video has shown you something you didn't see before, if you're looking at your financial situation differently now, I need your help. There are millions of people who will be the woman burning her savings, people who never saw it coming because no one showed them what to look for. You can be the person who shows them. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. A parent relying on a pension. A friend with all their savings in cash. A sibling who thinks this couldn't happen in America. You might be giving them the most valuable gift possible, time to prepare. I want to hear from you. Leave a comment telling me which warning sign concerns you most. Tell me what you're seeing in your own life, in your own community. These discussions are incredibly valuable. Sometimes the best insights come from people living through these conditions and observing them firsthand. If you want to continue learning, to understand not just the warning signs but the specific strategies for protection, subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. The information here could make the difference between devastation and security for you and the people you care about. Rome fell because its money died. France was transformed because the assignat became worthless. Germany descended into chaos because the mark was destroyed. The same crisis is building again. The warning signs are the same. The pattern is the same. The only question is whether you'll heed the warning, or become another person burning their savings for heat.